You can overcome a lot of challenges. You can overcome a lot of stressors if you are authentic with your team, with new leaders, with clients, if they know where you're coming from and who you are and what you're trying to convey. Little bumps, little issues, challenges, they can be overcome pretty consistently with that ethos.
Being authentic is one of the keys to being trusted by those we lead. And being worthy of our followers' trust, well, that's pretty darn important if you have any intention on being an exceptional leader. I'm your host, Tim Spiker, and this is the Be Worth Following podcast, a production of the People Forward Network. On this show, we talk with exceptional leaders, thinkers, and researchers about what actually drives effective leadership across the globe and over time. You just heard from Mark Minner, Senior Vice President of NFP. NFP is the 5th largest benefits broker in the world and is ranked in the top 5 best places to work in the insurance industry. And when you get to know Mark, you'll begin to understand why. As you'll hear in my discussion with him, Mark is just 32 years old, but his title, responsibilities, and experiences greatly supersede his age. I believe this is a great episode for both senior leaders and up-and-coming leaders to hear. For senior leaders, you'll get a chance to evaluate your younger leaders against Mark's attitudes and perspectives. For up-and-coming leaders, you'll have a chance to hear from a peer who has accomplished quite a lot very early in his career, including how he ascended to his current leadership role and how he led his organization through the process of being acquired. And be sure to stick around for the end of our discussion to hear a very unique role that Mark plays completely outside of his role as Senior Vice President. It's a role that allows him to be on the inside of a very unique world, and it is supplying him with valuable leadership lessons that he can apply in his day-to-day role as Senior Vice President. But first, let's hear from Mark about the leaders who have shaped him, from people he's known his entire life to a rather well-known name from the world of basketball.
One of the things that I feel really fortunate about is that I've had many people that I look up to and aspire to be in one way, shape, or form. And part of the beauty of life and relational depth is that you can pull a little bit from everybody that you come into contact with. But if you think about key people that kind of stand out in different ways, I would start with my parents for sure, because I was really fortunate to have 2 amazing parents who are role models in terms of how they treat others, how they view the world, how they try and give the best opportunity possible each and every day for my sister and I. And you don't realize growing up how much of an influence that is on you. And that is something that every day that goes by, you become more grateful for that and more appreciative for that. On the life side, when you go through school, I think so many times it's professors, and I couldn't even begin to start to name all the professors and teachers along the way that have coaches that have impacted me. I think from a relatability factor at a high level, I was fortunate to be in school and be around Butler when Brad Stevens was there. And I think a couple things stick out to me about Brad Stevens, because you're probably not going to read many articles where people don't rave about the type of person that he is. And there's a reason for that. It's because he's as authentic and as genuine, as thoughtful, and as talented as you're going to find of a leader. And he really embraced the servant leader mentality. So for me, watching Brad go from a 30-year-old head coach and his first job in basketball and only job at Butler to get that opportunity at such a young age with a team that was on the grow, had come off the Todd Licklider years, take that team to new heights in back-to-back Final Fours and national championships, do everything right along the way in terms of X's and O's, how he treated his players, how he treated the media, how he treated fellow coaches, and became so admired at such a young age. But the coolest thing to me about Brad is after all of that success and the movement into the Boston Celtics, he's the same exact person today that he was back then. Certainly he's got more experience and knowledge and things like that. He was one of the first people to call me up when I got the broadcast job at Butler. He keeps in touch with everybody at Butler. He still follows the university. When he approaches, he has no ego. He comes in with the same humility. And it's the little things from all of the experiences I hear, all the former players, all the fans, all the people that he stayed connected with at Butler, that he reaches out proactively with or stays responsive with, and all those situations. And he literally has every excuse under the sun not to be the same person and he is the same person. So one of the things, just purely from a leadership style, that I think is really important is authenticity. And watching somebody who's had the meteoric rise that he's had and maintain or even strengthen the humility factor and the authenticity factor is inspirational for me.
What a special background you have. And I don't say that simply because of what you just said about Brad Stevens, but you say, hey, it begins with my mom and dad. And then on the heels of that, you get a chance to have exposure to a leader like Brad Stevens, who, as you just described, is the type of person you want to emulate, not because of all the X and O success, which has been there in spades, but because you have had a backstage pass to know him and to be around him. And that really is what causes that desire to emulate, that desire to follow. And that's really a wonderful background you have to leap off of. And so let's go ahead and take that leap, because you, in your own right, have had some pretty amazing opportunities and success at a pretty early stage in your career. I want to talk about your role as president and chief strategist for NFP, which was previously First Person. I want to talk about that role. And in order to do that, I want to set the stage just a little bit, just for the sake of everybody listening. Your current age is?
I just celebrated a birthday last week. I turned 32.
My point here is that when it comes to the leadership activity, you are still pretty early in your influence that you're going to have over the course of your life, God willing. And it's interesting to land in a spot, in a title that says President and Chief Strategy Officer at this stage in life. So take us through a little bit your career path that has landed you in such a seat of influence at such an early point in your career.
This goes back to opportunity, both preparing yourself, taking advantage of, and most importantly, having people in your life that support you and help you along in that process. So for me, I was originally playing baseball, growing up, enjoying sports, those types of things, and got into school, and I won't go too far into that, but got into school to go to broadcasting. Partway through school, realized that broadcasting was a great academic pursuit, but I really liked the idea of business as well. And so I picked up a double major in business in my time at Butler and did some internships, worked with a lot of small businesses, medium-sized businesses, and realized I loved meeting different people. I loved the relationships. I loved the variety and all those things. And so for me, when I was graduating, I gave a presentation on the internship experience at Butler, on the opportunity to consult. And one of the people in the crowd was the founder of the company that I've worked at for 10 years, Brian Brenner, who was a Butler grad himself, and came up to me afterwards and said, hey, I've got a small consulting firm. I'd love to learn more about what you're interested in and tell you a little bit about our team. And that started a relationship and a friendship that I immediately felt a connection to, right? An opportunity to grow. I went to Butler because I saw it as an entrepreneurial experience. I went to First Person because I saw it as an opportunity to be an entrepreneurial experience and carve a different path and figure out and learn and grow. And Brian's mentorship has been incredibly invaluable in my life. And for me, I realized early on, and this is back to your question of how do you do that? Well, number one, I didn't come into the company thinking I was going to be the president of the company. And I'm not a big person on 1, 3, 5, 10, 20-year goals. This needs to happen because I think life takes a lot of twists and turns, and you can directionally have things you want to accomplish. But for me, it's foundational around the type of people I want in my life, the challenges I want, the opportunity to grow in all different ways. And so I realized you had to be good in our profession, and to grow in our profession, you had to understand the profession. And so that meant getting in there and actually learning the technical work and putting in the hours to understand why the business did what it did, and why do people buy from us, why do people not buy from us, what creates good outcomes. And then along the way, I think some of the most important things, back to that authenticity piece and looking for other people, is if I'm just trying to go out and be a good technician, or if I'm just trying to go out and climb the ladder or whatever, not fulfilling and also not all encompassing. For me, it was about getting to know the people on our team, building relationships with our clients, building relationships with the community, building relationships with our internal team members, because I genuinely wanted to. It wasn't like I'm trying to just do it because I think it's a box checking. I genuinely wanted to get to know. And through all of those conversations, you understand in different perspectives, why do they work here? What do they like about it? What do they not like about it? What are things they wish would change? What do our clients need? And you start to assimilate a lot of that information, and then you're able to use that for good, right? And you're able to help give new ideas and help push the envelope and help create change. And so along the way of that, you're continually staying kinetic with all those different stakeholders and the community that you live in and work in. And as that happened, as we grew, I was able to help support Brian and help support our leaders in the organization and trying to continue to improve. And not everything's perfect. We could do a whole 100-part podcast on everything I've screwed up or learned in the first 10 years of working. But we only have an hour, so we'll talk about the good things. And so along the way, it's about providing impact and being there to support, be empathetic and challenge and take the technical knowledge that everybody has in the relation and help try and move people along on their own individual journey. And if you can do that well, I've been fortunate to be able to be in a position now where I can help more people. I can help support more people moving their careers along and moving our clients along in different ways. So it really hasn't been about trying to do like 3 things and then all of a sudden you're in this spot. It goes back to that authenticity piece. It's about really having a genuine interest in understanding where everybody's coming from, what everybody's looking to achieve, and can you be somebody who can help the group accomplish that further, not because of what I'm good at, but because of helping people bring their own talents to new levels.
This seat that you currently sit in, one when you just mentioned, the kind of there's greater influence and greater opportunity now. How long have you been in that president's role? Because I want to go back to the beginning of that story just a little bit.
I've been with the team for 10 years, and I've been in the leadership team probably for 5 or 6 of those, in president role for the last 3.5 years.
So talk a little bit about when Brian came to you and you come to realize that not only are you going to be on the leadership team, but you're going to be leading that leadership team. He wants you to be in that president's role. What went through your head? What went through your heart? What was it like to have somebody say, hey, we want you to lead this thing from the most influential seat in the room?
I don't think I can fully understand the full perspective on it because it just felt like a continuance of the opportunity to work with people that you cared about. So I think in some respects, I did not and still do not fully probably think about the full gravity of that because I'm not really a super hierarchical leader, right? I haven't had a desk in 8 years. I don't make it more formal than it needs to be. However, I think the thing that was really important for me, especially to your question about being at a young age, is most every room I'm in fact, probably all the rooms I'm in our company, when I sit down in a conference room, I'm not the smartest person in the room. And that's a really good thing. And so the thing that was really important for me at a young age to feel like I could step into that role is I needed to exhibit the behaviors to the team that showed that I understood what the challenges were and I understood and they felt like there was a mutually beneficial relationship of being able to support them as opposed to just like Brian waving a wand and saying, you're the president. To me, it wasn't about an appointment of that title. It was about trying to make sure that as I moved into that role, I viewed that and the team hopefully started to see that as just a larger opportunity to help improve everybody else's roles and careers and balance and all those other things. So to be honest, when that conversation first started happening, I was reluctant because I didn't feel like I had demonstrated that to the capacity it needed to be demonstrated with. And honestly, Tim, that was at a time where we were going through a lot of change in the organization. And anytime you're in an entrepreneurial business and there's a lot of, you hit a lot of S curves, sometimes it's really good. Sometimes it's really challenging. And, we were at a moment where it was challenging. And so it was trying to figure out how it wasn't me just coming in as a new voice in the room to be a different voice, but to be a voice that really understands and cares for. So I would say to me, it was less formal and it was more trying to figure out how I could earn the respect through conversation, through seeking to understand from the balance of the team.
What was different for you from the previous roles that you played? And where I'm thinking about this in particular, not that we're building this entire episode for the younger up-and-coming leaders that are our listeners, but at the same time, there may be some others out there who might have some early opportunities and they could learn a little bit from the transition that you went through.
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's a few that come to mind. One is obvious, which is the ultimate accountability. At some point, the approval process becomes really lean. The pendulum switches between yes and no, and you go to no more. And that's a different experience. Nobody's looking to disappoint people, and nobody's looking to make people's life more challenging. But that is a definite shift that occurs, and that's just part of the job. I do think one of the things as I've reflected on that, and Brian's been a really good challenge to me in a lot of this, as we have an incredible leadership team, and they do a good job of this too, which is before that seat, I felt like a lot of times I was trying to propose ideas that were challenging the status quo. And I feel like through that, I gained credibility maybe, or people appreciated the fact that we were trying to push the envelope forward. What happens, I think, maybe naturally, or I felt myself getting there it's kind of like now I'm on the other side of the table, and maybe the tendency is not to become complacent, but now I start to change the mindset a little bit. That's the same status quo challenging mindset, because I'm the one that's in that seat helping run that. And so I think one of the biggest changes is continuing to find new ways to disrupt yourself. And that's kind of an interesting concept, because I felt like I was maybe disrupting not people, but the status quo of the way it was operating before. And now you're operating it. So now you got to disrupt yourself, because you might have people challenging some of those things, but how do you not just sit back and wait for people to challenge your own ideas? How do you be a little bit more proactive in some of that stuff? So that was really germane in COVID. You've got teams that are trying to figure out how to do that differently. Examples of that would be, we started doing a weekly all team. We'd usually done quarterly all team meetings, but disruption to yourself was, we need to get in front of everybody every week. Too many things are going on. People need consistency. People need stability. So let's figure out how to do that differently. Number two is, how do we disrupt the work week? So we started implementing universal focus time, which is, people needed time to get away from Zoom. They needed time to get their work done. So universal blocks a window within our company each and every week, multiple times per week, where nobody would schedule meetings. How are we supporting families differently? Because COVID obviously affected that. So we started doing not just the virtual happy hours and things like that, but drop-offs at home. And not just that we were doing drop-offs, but it was managers dropping things off. Why? Because it allowed for human-to-human connection from a distance, to be safe, to do. So all of those things along the way, and those are just a few small examples, but you're trying to disrupt. My mindset became a little bit of like, how do I almost try and push the envelope so that the team is the one trying to play defense a little bit against some of the ideas there? I think as a younger leader in that sense, you're trying not to become too many crazy ideas, but you're also, I think there's a sense of humility, which is keep asking people what you could be doing. This is an important clarification as well. Not just asking, what could I be doing better? Hey, let me know if there's something I could be doing better. Being literal. What could I be doing better? What are the things? Because we know that could be the case.
And we're going to sit here in the awkward silence until you give me some kind of answer on that.
I know you're going to tell everybody what I could do better when I leave the room, so you might as well just do it while I'm here right now.
That's great. Part of me is hearing that maybe as you step into that role, there's a little bit of a temptation to play not to lose rather than to play to win. What happens when we do that?
You lose.
Right. The prevent defense. There's a football person that's going to chime in and tell me why the prevent defense is a good idea, but I can only remember it preventing teams from winning.
The prevent defense works if there's like 60 seconds on the clock, but when you've got a business that you're trying to grow for the rest of the time, prevent defense doesn't work.
When you sit in the seat kind of ultimate responsibility, there probably is a temptation to take a few less risks, to dial it back. How do I not screw this up instead of launch it forward? Which is really interesting for those that might be those very energetic status quo challengers out there. Might hearing this give them a little more grace for the leaders that they're challenging all the time? Maybe I might dial my judgment back a little bit of the person who doesn't agree with my idea, because they've got a unique perspective and responsibility and accountability that they're sitting in.
I think that's a great point. And I think there's usually two ends of the spectrum. And, sometimes you work in an entrepreneurial organization and you've got an owner or a leader or somebody like that built the business because of the just continually pushing. And then there's this natural defense mechanism. I've seen it both ways where like all things in life, it's always somewhere in the middle. You can't be sitting back on your heels and just protecting what you have or looking for marginal growth. You're not going to have success doing that. The other thing is if you're constantly creating so much change that it turns into chaos, now that has also created an issue because now you're keeping people maybe over the edge within the organization and make sure people stay sharp or whatever. But now you've made it impossible for people to feel like they've actually done their job and feel good about it. So I think for me, one of the biggest takeaways is in that seat, how do you continue to push the envelope and respect that there's a lot of people that not everybody's the same, right? So you're going to have different personalities, and that means everybody brings different skill sets to the table. So if somebody's not working well over here, how do we look at that in the balance of the team and where might that be a fit? So I've looked at it more like putting a puzzle together, except the puzzle's kind of never ending, and you're just trying to continue to make more of the puzzle come together and fill out. So I think for me, it's been an interesting journey because you're trying to continue to change, you're trying to continue to evolve, because if you don't evolve, you're going to struggle. But also that you can't get so caught up with the concept of change that it turns into chaos. And then all of a sudden, people can't feel like they're winning most every day. And so that's been an interesting balance, right? And certainly a different balance when it's remote workforce and you're dealing with external factors in the globe and you're dealing with workforce challenges around employer-employee dynamics and everything we've gone through the last couple of years. So it's been a fascinating learning experience, but I can tell you really clearly, Tim, the most important part has been getting a great team around, because to me, it's kind of like the bumper lanes in bowling. And by the way, if you and I bowled, I don't even know your game, you'd beat me. But I feel like the bumper piece is really important. If you've got that really strong leadership team that you get to work with, you can overcome a lot. And they keep you kind of in the center. If you're not pushing enough, then they'll push you a little more. So to me, the biggest focus for me as a younger leader has been making sure I'm surrounded by really, really intelligent, really, really capable people around. That's what's made this all the better in terms of enjoyment, but also trying to have a better bearings or true north along all the twists and turns.
Many years ago, I heard the late General Norman Schwarzkopf say, good people can make a bad plan work. And I feel like in kind of articulating what you are about your team, not that you're setting out to have a bad plan, but let's just call it an imperfect plan, which describes just about every plan that exists. And this idea of having these bumpers so the bowling ball is not going to go in the gutter, that's a really great visual. And back to what you were talking about a moment ago with regard to challenging and taking risks, if you've got that great team around you, I got to think that it makes the exploration of possibilities a little freer, because you trust your team's going to say, hey, no way are we doing that. They're going to tell you the truth because you've got those kinds of people around you, which allows you to a little more freedom of thought and exploration.
For sure. And I think if you can create an environment where people feel like they can give you, I think the term radical candor, right? If they can come at you and feel safe, they got the psychological safety to come and tell you what they really think, that's great, because I would much rather know that before throwing the ball in the gutter myself. And I've seen examples of that. I can think very clearly of a situation. Allie Isaacs, who's been a dear colleague for 7 years and a great friend who I've worked with, there was a situation where I jumped out and got ahead of something and really pushed on something. And she called me on. She's like, hey, I just want to let you know, we can do this. And if that's what you want to do, we'll do. I'm going to tell you you're wrong on this. And the team thinks you're wrong on this. And so in that moment, let's have a little humility. Let's take a dose of our own medicine. Let's engage in dialogue around it. And the number one response anytime somebody does that, it wouldn't be the first time somebody's told me that, is thank you. Thank you for telling me what you really think. And whether we continue to push on with that or change course, as a young leader, you have to be able to, or as a leader in general, have to be able to get honesty and candor from those around you. And so to be able to get that, you got to continue to not make it awkward for people to give you that feedback, right? Because that's the only way that you're going to grow or that you're going to be able to help take the team in the right direction.
The fact that she came to you and just straight up said, I think you're wrong, and so does the rest of the team. I know more leaders than I could count who that would never happen to them, not because they're never wrong, but because they haven't created the space for that. It's too scary.
We told our team when the best places to work comes out and we're trying to get feedback, we're trying to get participation on that, my comment to the team in that situation is please fill it out honestly and know two things. Number one, if there's negative feedback or critical feedback, put it in there, number one. And number two, don't be afraid to just tell us that feedback afterwards. And number two is, because I think people sometimes, when you're filling out some of that stuff, you feel like if you give it a 9 or a 10, maybe that means that people think that leadership thinks that they've done it right or get complacent or whatever. So my feedback in that situation is, if something's going well, please put it down that it's going well, because it doesn't make us complacent. It says that we're going in the right direction, so we don't start doing something different because we don't think we've done the right thing. So in that respect, I will appreciate that, and it just further fuels me and our team, hopefully, to continue to do those types of things.
There's a group of clients we're currently working with on a deep dive on self-awareness. And one of the things that we emphasize them is the need to really receive with depth and curiosity the positive feedback that they get because of what you just said. If we were to take a pie chart, and I'm just making up some numbers here, but let's say there's 10% of different ways that you can do something effectively, which means there's 90% of ways you can do it ineffectively. And so if somebody's giving you feedback and says, hey, you're in that green wedge of 10%, like slow down, ask more questions, really dig in. It's not about bragging or boasting. It's about making sure that you understand somebody's telling you you're making a great and positive difference in this way. Let's not gloss over that. And to your point, let's make sure I don't stop doing those things, because if I'm not conscious of the significance of it to you, I might inadvertently stop doing something that's really important for our team that I didn't realize was important for our team. So when you're getting feedback, move the positive stuff. Two things. Move it to the back and give it proper time so that you can really hear the fullness of that and pursue that like an investigative journalist, the same way you would for the corrective stuff, the stuff that needs to be better. I want to come back to authenticity. You mentioned it a couple of times early on, and in particular, as you and I were getting ready for this discussion, we talked a little bit about your firm just went through a transition of ownership, and we talked about authenticity in dealing with that transition. And so many people have been through that type of situation or are in the middle of it. I just would love for folks to hear a little bit about your approach to being acquired and how you chose to lead through that ownership transition.
It's interesting, Tim. As you said, you talked to a lot of people who have gone through transitions. Anytime I tell somebody, oh, we went through an acquisition, the first thing's almost like a funeral. It's like, oh, I'm so sorry. How are you doing? It's like, no, I don't think you understand. This was A, intentional, and B, it's been great. And so it's kind of comical to me. And for us, I give Brian and our team that went through this a lot of credit because, first off, he was not just sitting there looking to sell for something. I'm trying to get out and I'm trying to sell the house. That wasn't the intention of it. It was, we want to do what's right for our people. We want to do what's right for our client. And we want to look at the market right now and the opportunity and the timing and all those things. And it was the right decision for all three of those. So as we went through the process and we looked at companies to link up with, NFP became a really clear opportunity because we'd had an existing business relationship. We knew them. We saw people that had been acquired by them that have stayed for decades and are really happy there, and their people stayed. And that was a really big indicator for us, not just taking people at their word for how they are going to do post-acquisition, but watching that play out and knowing those relationships. When we went through the transition, none of us had gone through an acquisition before. I'd never led through an M&A process, but we approached it like, what would we want if we were on the other side of it? And don't make false commitments to people, be authentic, right? And what does that mean? It means being really thoughtful on the front end. Are we doing this deal in a way that we actually believe this is going to be beneficial for the team? Like, do we actually believe that? And can we communicate that? And how do we communicate that? And don't just tell people to, there's not going to be any change, or there's not going to be, it's like, there will be change. We don't know what all those changes will be like. I don't know ultimately what this will impact you like, but here's why we're doing this, and here's what we see as the opportunity. And so when we went through the acquisition, we actually had a party the day we announced it. We had a whole tree of things leading up to the announcement on the acquisition. When we did the acquisition, we had a whole day at an event space where Brian spoke about what this meant for him. I spoke very specifically about why we did the deal, what we need to do. We had longtime leaders within the company positioned at small roundtables for open discussion for 30, 45 minutes to be able to take questions and just talk about what it means to people. Raw emotion. There were tears, there were smiles, there were laughs, there were all of that. And then we took an open mic and we let anybody in the company ask any question about what this meant. And we answered them live. We answered everything we could. We talked about what the next steps were. We had FAQs for clients. We had FAQs for the internal team. We had all those things lined up because we wanted to give people all of the information as honestly as we possibly could so that they knew that what we knew, we were communicating. What we didn't know, we were communicating. We didn't know that. And we were going to try and do that. We went through the transition and the leadership team. I was so proud of our consultants that were out in the market, all of our employees, really, every single one of our employees that took a leap of faith with us and trusted in what we were saying. And this year, this calendar year, not only did we just come off our best year in company history, but best places to work, top workplaces, and we've had 0 employee turnover in 2022 calendar year, which is remarkable. And so for us, that is a testament to every single person on the team who is approaching their day and seeing the possibility, giving feedback, trying to make their workplace a better workplace from their own seat with their manager, with the leadership team, with the new opportunity within NFP. And NFP, on the other hand, has given us every opportunity to come in, been respectful of the business we've run, been respectful of the opportunity. And that's because we did a lot of work on the front end to get to know each other and be clear about what was really important to each of us and have a spirit of authenticity and mutuality as we kind of worked through things. I can tell you there's plenty of things we would do differently, plenty of things that were screwed up. I don't mean to paint some Pollyanna picture of how everything's been perfect. And there were a lot of things, again, you're not running a business without challenges and things you need to change and all of those types of things. But the whole point of your question, I think, and the positive opportunity through it is you can overcome a lot of issues. You can overcome a lot of challenges. You can overcome a lot of stressors if you are authentic with your team, with the new entity, with new leaders, with clients, with everybody in the fold, if they know where you're coming from and who you are and what you're trying to convey, little bumps, little issues, challenges, they can be overcome pretty consistently with that ethos.
One of the things that just is striking to me about that story is the intentionality around, number one, where we don't know, we need to say we don't know. There are many people who go through not just acquisitions, but any other number of challenges who feel a great deal of concern about saying those words. And granted, if your answer to all questions is I don't know, you've got a problem there, but it's not an honesty problem or an authenticity problem. How many times organizations of all stripes go through some type of major transition, and to the rank and file workers in the organization is that message over and over again, nothing's going to change. If nothing's going to change, why the hell are we doing this?
Something should change. Of course.
Yes. And so I love the honesty and authenticity of, yes, some things are going to change. And of course, people will be concerned about how they'll personally be impacted and will they be able to continue to execute well? Will they continue to get bonuses? All the things that might go along with questions in an acquisition. The authenticity and honesty in all of that, I think, is unfortunately somewhat unique. I want to take a little bit of a transition as we start to wrap up here, because there's a part of your life that is rather public that we haven't discussed at all, and it's really unique, and it ties back to your comments earlier regarding Brad Stevens. So you are, in addition to being the president and chief strategy officer, you are also the play-by-play voice for Butler men's basketball. And again here, just to reiterate, you're 32 years old currently, and you have been the play-by-play announcer for Butler men's basketball for how many years?
This will be my 10th season.
10th season. So Mark became the play-by-play announcer for Butler men's basketball at the ripe old age of 22 years old. And for those who are not connected into the college basketball world, I'll just fill in a few gaps here. Now, you heard him mention regarding Brad Stevens' career previously. So in 2010 and 2011, Butler, as what is normally referred to as a mid-major basketball team, played in the national championship game. Their head coach went on to become the head coach for the Boston Celtics and has since then become the general manager for the Boston Celtics. Meanwhile, Butler has continued to win and win and win and win. And if you want to go into that quote-unquote mid-major space, there's only one other school that could be in competition with Butler for the kind of the crown jewel of consistently be good in that space, and that's Gonzaga. So Butler made this leap under Brad Stevens in particular, and continuing on to be really an elite basketball program. And in this now nationally known program, the play-by-play guy is 22 years old. So I just, talk a little bit about that role, because it's obviously completely different than being the president of a company. And you get to wear that hat. You just got back from a trip to Italy with the basketball team. And so that's a part of your life that's extremely unique that I think people would like to hear a little bit about.
It is so much fun. I'm so fortunate, Tim. I'm fortunate for a lot of reasons. Many of them you've cataloged here today. On the basketball side, I love sports. I love Butler University, and I love broadcasting. And for me, it's a hobby and a love that you get to do. I would love to broadcast if there were 3 people sitting out there and we were calling a wiffle ball game in the backyard and just having fun doing it, right? To be able to do it for your alma mater, to be able to do it for a program that's built on so many greats and built, obviously, the reputation you described now in the Big East and playing in these incredible venues and against top talent across the country. And to do that all, this is back to the same idea that the one of the common links between NFP and Butler has been the people. It is so special to have been able to be around so many incredible student athletes, coaches, supporters, administrators. It's a family. I grew up in the Chicago suburbs. This is my family here, right, in Indianapolis, and I have been so grateful. I've gotten for all 10 of those years to call games with one of my best friends, Nick Gardner, and so it's like, pick your friend, go out, travel around, call games for a team you love, and I got to get pinched every time I'm get to do that, and it's never lost upon me. And to me, one of the coolest things about broadcasting, Tim, has been it's made me better at my day job. And I would encourage many young people out there, parents with young kids, to get them into some type of performance, but if not broadcasting. And part of that's because in broadcasting, in a game like this, you've got to prepare. If you don't prepare, you sound like an idiot. So number one, preparation pays off, but you may only use 8% of what you prepare for the game. You don't know what 8% that's going to be, but preparing creates a better product and a confidence when you go out there. Number two, you're live. For 3 hours, you're live. There is no script. There is no thing to rely on. Much like leading a team or leading a client endeavor or whatever the case is, you can't ask somebody else what to do in that situation right on the fly. You have to be able to respond. You have to be able to think on your feet. You got to be able to be creative. And again, the authenticity piece is really important, right? You're having a conversation with all the people that you're talking to. So you got to make that a connection. And I picture that. I feel that when I get to talk to my broadcast partner, I get to talk to the people listening, well, probably 2 of them when they're listening to us. And then I think the last part is just the ability to time manage and react in real time, right? So number one is you only have X amount of words to get in to describe a play. You only have X amount of things to do before a commercial break. A technical issue could happen. You may have a buzzing in your headphone. You got to be able to roll through those things, right? So when you get into a corporate setting and you get into a meeting and you're missing a page in a binder, or your presentation deck wasn't what you thought it would be, or somebody misses the meeting, life goes on. You roll with the punches. And I think that on the flip side, being in business and dealing with many different personalities and working to understand stories of where people come from, what they're trying to get, what clients are trying to, that's the same type of thing you're doing there. You're storytelling and broadcasting. You're understanding individual stories. You're understanding team stories, and you're trying to communicate those stories in the most efficient but heartfelt way to the listening audience. So there's so many parallels, but to be able to do that and to travel around, and I could spend another couple of days telling great stories, but really ultimately beyond my love of broadcasting, it's the people, and Butler's such a special place, and I'm so grateful.
I have to throw in there, I'm thinking of the venues in which you do this work. On a day in and day out basis, you're calling games in Hinkle Fieldhouse. For people who don't know, it is one of the greatest basketball arenas that exists in this country.
And Tim and I can fight over it. It is the greatest. But no, I'm just kidding. Yeah, yes, I obviously have a bias.
Hey, I'm glad that you are certain about that. You should be certain about that. I'm giving it at least one of. But then on top of that, and I know things are changing and morphing, and I may have missed on a few years, but in general, the Big East tournament has been held in the most famous arena in the world, Madison Square Garden. And so I imagine that you've called a few games in MSG over the years.
Yes is the answer. And when East tournament rolls around and they're playing my old school and a little Steely Dan as guys are getting warmed up for that noon tip to kick off 4 days during tournament week, I'm like, oh my God, just can I sit here for 6 days?
And then you get to bring Butler basketball to a whole generation of people who associate that really great institution with your voice. So that's really special, really awesome. Appreciate the time, man. This is so much fun. Great stories. A lot of rich stuff for us to take in from Mark Minner. 3 things I want to make sure that we make a special point of before we sign off from this episode. First of all, let's start with authenticity. You heard it so many times in the discussion, but I want to reiterate it again because it's a rare quality. And when you think about the world in which we live and lead in with social media, which allows you to put up just a happy, perfect story and present a front to people, in that world that we are in, authenticity stands out. If you and I want to be the very best leaders that we can be, authenticity has to be a part of the story because authenticity deserves trust. Being trusted is a natural consequence of being authentic, and trust fuels performance in organizations. I love the story about their acquisition where they went out of their way to say to people, things are, in fact, going to change. They couldn't count the number of times where people and organizations go through really big changes and they say, nothing's going to change. That's crazy in so many different ways, and people know that. And so I love the authenticity of telling people the truth, dealing with the truth. Even as you heard him talk about their surveys for best places to work, telling his own people, if you have some critical things, to share them. So you know that when they show up on those best places to work lists, it's not because they got everybody around and said, hey, everybody write happy, shiny things about the organization. No, it was, in fact, the truth. So just another example of Mark's authenticity and the authenticity he's trying to drive in the organization. Another point that I want to come back to is when he talked about what it was like to make the transition to sitting in the seat of president, where previously he was essentially somebody that was consistently challenging the status quo, and now sitting in that seat as president to continue to have that mentality. And he talked about the idea of challenging your own thinking, challenging yourself, challenging your own status quo, not just sitting back and waiting for other people to do it, but being proactive in that. And I think there's something very profound about that mentality, because embedded in that, I think, is the perspective that the top leadership role is not the seat that we sit in and everybody just comes with their ideas. It's totally the opposite of that entitlement mentality of sitting in that royal seat. No, it's saying, hey, even as I'm responsible for leading, I need to continually be challenging the way this organization works. I need to challenge myself and not just sit back and wait for others to do that. Finally, I want to take you back to the story where he talked about his team member, Allie, that came to him and told him that he was wrong. Like straight up, I need you to know that I think you're wrong and the team thinks you're wrong. And I want you to take note of Mark's response being that of saying thank you. You know, for some of you out there, that's an easy thing, but there are many of us who struggle with leaning into the idea of gratitude when someone brings us what we might call bad news, especially if it's bad news about ourselves or bad news about an idea that we were championing. And to have the mentality, and not just the words of thank you, but the perspective of thank you. To have a heart that's genuinely appreciative that somebody would come to us and tell us the truth. And so that leads me to a question that's a little bit of a litmus test for us in terms of where we are. and that is this. When is the last time somebody came to you and straight up told you you're wrong, and in your heart of hearts, your response was, "Thank you"? I know for me, it's been way too long. This is Tim Spiker reminding you to be worth following and to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. If you've heard something valuable today, please share us with your colleagues and friends. And if you're up for it, leave us a 5-star review. Thanks for listening.